Greetings, this is Ekaterina Nesterenko in the studio with you. Today we're talking about the explosions in Bryansk and Tatarstan. The GUR is targeting Kadyrov's men in occupied Berdyansk. Ukrainian armed forces drones are striking the gas pipeline at the Slavyansk oil refinery. And Putin is tempting Trump with Arctic deposits and joint business ventures after a favorable peace with Ukraine. Orbán is once again proposing to divide Ukraine and turn it into a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. Rosneft's profits have plummeted by 70%. But Putin is allocating a record $166 billion for military needs. Zaluzhnyi warns that even if the war is frozen, it will only be a pause before a new round. All this and more in just a few seconds. And right now, please like this video and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. Ukrainian main intelligence directorate fighters punished Kadyrov's men in the occupied territory. On November 29, 2025, two explosions occurred in the Berdyansk district of the Zaporizhzhia region. Ukrainian intelligence and local partisans uncovered the scheme that Kadyrov's Akhmat unit was running. They were stealing fuel, transporting it out, and selling diesel right by the highway at the same spot. Basically, it was a little fuel startup named after Akhmat in the village, well, until Ukraine showed up. The scouts mined the trading spot and waited for the black marketeers' occupiers to gather there again. At the moment of their gathering, the first explosion went off. Those who survived scattered. But the show wasn't over yet. After a while, another enemy pickup truck arrived at the now empty spot, and then there was a second blast. The result, two Akhmat vehicles destroyed. Enemy personnel losses are still being clarified, but there definitely are some. And no matter how difficult it is, our soldiers continue to resist the Russian horde, which vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't support them financially, leave them words of encouragement in the comments. At night in Russia, it's once again brighter than day. From Saturday to Sunday, several sites were attacked by Ukrainian drones at once. The oil and processing facility Slavyanskaya Eka in Krasnodar Krai and the Anapa area.
Explosion. Basically, bro, check this out.
A gas pipe was damaged on the refinery grounds, unfortunately without a major fire. But the shockwave was strong. At the same time, railway junctions in the occupied territories of Donbass also came under attack. There, drone strikes were recorded and enemy logistics were disrupted. Meanwhile, in the Rostov region, after a nighttime raid, a boiler house shut down and an industrial facility caught fire. As expected, Russian authorities are not disclosing exactly what was burning. Tatarstan was not spared either. There were explosions again in Yelabuga, right in the Yelabuga area where shaheds are manufactured. This is already the second attack in the past few days. On November 28th, there was also a fire there. In Bryansk, a locomotive was taken out of action. Agents of the underground movement, entice, set fire to electric locomotives on the railway, disrupting the Russian schedule for transporting ammunition to the Sumy direction. And while the Ministry of Death of the Russian Federation reports 33 drones successfully shot down, you know very well what they forgot to mention. How many actually made it through? Meanwhile, in Z-Publics, people are already comparing the scale of the damage from the Ukrainian attack on Novorossiysk on November 13th to Operation Web. According to them, UAVs destroyed the S-400 complex's position area, detonated 4 out of 7 launches, and along with them, 2 radars were also destroyed. And then Neptunes also hit the oil terminal. But let me remind you, the special military operation is still going according to plan. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And in the meantime, we continue. Next comes the most interesting part. Ukraine is synchronizing US sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced new restrictions against Russian companies and their subsidiaries, as well as against individuals who are organizing the systematic destruction of Ukrainians using drones. Specific names have not yet been disclosed, but the essence is clear. Pressure on Russia's economy and defense sector continues. According to Zelensky, this is only the beginning. Moving on. Preparation of the 20th sanctions package by the European Union, tightening of restrictions against the shadow fleet, Russian military production, collaborators, and propagandists. And the results of American sanctions, as they say, are already evident. According to Reuters, Rosneft's net profit plummeted by 70% over 9 months, amounting to only 277 billion rubles. This is 3.5 and even more billion dollars against the backdrop of high interest rates, cheap oil, and a strengthening ruble. Previously, similar US sanctions led to the closure of Lukoil gas stations in Finland, which clearly demonstrates the effect of joint pressure. In other words, the strategy of Ukraine and its allies is working. No matter how you look at it, the sanctions are hitting the Kremlin's pockets, limiting its ability to wage war and develop the shadow economy. Meanwhile, Russian women are surviving however they can. She found a simpleton, got married, convinced her husband to go to war, quickly became a widow, and received $190,000 in compensation from the state budget. Learn more about Russian black widows in our report.
An ordinary Russian woman recorded her joyful feelings on camera after she got married. She had been looking for a man like this her whole life.
He's going to the special military operation, so that's it. I'm registering the kids under his name. I get a lump sum payment of 5 million. I also get a monthly payment, something like 200 to 300,000, yeah. Plus, the payoff is just awesome, right? Kindergarten benefits. Who is he? School benefits.
There's even a jackpot possible if something happens to her newlywed husband on the front line. A grief-stricken widow will significantly improve her financial situation. And
then, basically, he'll get killed over there. Yeah, I don't even know if we'll buy a house or not.
After this video appeared online, the woman from Tyumen kept trying to explain herself, saying her words were taken out of context. She claimed that wasn't what she meant at all.
If you marry a participant in the special military operation, you get a down payment for an apartment. Or like, if my husband goes to the special operation, I'll get this amount of money. This isn't just some statement made to attract attention. These aren't some hype-seeking bloggers. It's simply an ordinary reflection within the system that's been built, which only shows that this has long become commonplace. In
Russia, women like this have already started being called black widows. And for the sake of money, they won't stop at anything. They deliberately choose men who drink and are low income, marry them, and send them to the front. And after their death, they spend the millions from the death benefits.
It's all incredibly easy and quite simple. You just find a man now who's currently serving in the special military operation. He tragically dies, and you then get 8 million.
It's a working scheme.
Of course. A lot of people are doing this now. A lot of women come to us with these 8 million, buy some cheap little apartment.
And then they look again?
I don't know. I haven't asked. I should ask about that.
So it's really a working scheme, turns out.
It's a business plan.
Vladimir Reshetov was born with his sister in a small village in the northern Orenburg region. When his sister grew up, she got married and moved to Samara. Vladimir had a strained relationship with her, but he often visited his nephews. On the days he was in Samara, he would go to the local computer club where he drank with its owner, Armen Barsanyan. Perhaps the enterprising Armen saw an opportunity to get rich in his drinking companion, since Vladimir's only close relative left was his sister. Most importantly, Vladimir was single. Titkov spent the new year 2025 and the holidays in Samara, including at AR Game. There, Armen showed his drunken friend a photo of his 38-year-old sister Asmik and suggested he marry her. On the first working day after the holiday, January 9th, 2025, Titkov got married. He never even saw the bride. The day after the wedding, Armen took his new relative to the military enlistment office of the Oktyabrski district. There, Vladimir signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense. Already on the 10th, the young groom left for the war, and 3 days later, all contact with him was lost. In the summer of 2025, Vladimir's sister Tatiana received a call from his unit informing her that on April 28th, her brother had gone missing. And in the fall, a friend of his sister, by chance at the cemetery where his cousin was buried, saw a grave with a photograph of Tatiana's brother. October 6th, Tatiana went to the Oktyabrski military office. An employee confirmed Vladimir Titkov buried September 11th, identified by Osmik, his wife before the front. Reshetova realized the Vorosyans handled the burial. Was a DNA test conducted on the deceased Titkov? How could a wife identify a husband she had never seen? Did she receive funeral benefits for Vladimir? And most importantly, who is actually buried in the grave? Tatiana, his sister, is now searching for answers to these questions together with a lawyer. With his help, she hopes to secure the exhumation of the body, prove that Vladimir's marriage to Smik was a sham, and send everyone involved to prison. The sister insists that she is seeking not money but justice. Although if the marriage is annulled, she will be the sole heir to her late brother's millions. It's unclear whether Vladimir Reshetov was Aska's first victim, but it's obvious that the Varsonian siblings could not have pulled off such a scheme on their own. This is how Vladimir's sister Tatiana recounted the story to a Russian publication. And this is just one of many scams in which so-called black widows may be involved.
This is a very common phenomenon. In short, it happens all the time. You came up with this yourselves. You created this system yourselves. You are the ones promoting it. You advertise it on your own Z channels. Get 5 million rubles. You know, for the first year of service and so on. The regions are competing with each other to see who can pay more in order to attract as much cannon fodder as possible.
The publication describes several schemes used by black widows, and it shared real-life stories. The ultimate goal, obviously, is enrichment. There are even women who manage to marry not just one, but even 2 or more SVO soldiers. 29-year-old Ekaterina Morozova from Tula, a seasoned black widow, received 2.5 million for one SVO husband, and at his funeral, she met her next victim, who suffered the same terrible fate. According to the third scenario, one-day wives don't act alone, but as part of a group. Such a case occurred in the Arkhangelsk region. 3 local residents convinced a stranger to marry one of them and go off to war.
After his death, the accomplices received more than 15 million rubles. The relatives went to the police. During the investigation, it turned out that the scammers had turned it into a business, seeking out lonely, alcoholic, unemployed men. And
when you literally pawn your own son or husband or father just to get money, it's monstrous. It's an absolute betrayal of yourself. And the state has built a system in which this has become commonplace.
It's not that hard to find a military sponsor in Russia. There are groups on social networks, Telegram, and even special bots that look for participants in the so-called special operation.
Russia is preparing record spending for the war against Ukraine. Putin has signed the budget law for 2026. Russia plans to spend at least $166 billion on military needs. That's almost a third of the entire national budget, and probably the largest military spending since the Soviet era. At the same time, according to Russian media, social spending is being cut and taxes on the population will be significantly increased. In other words, the Kremlin is choosing war and the military, while the people are left to adapt to the new reality. Russians have been advised to prepare for a new pension reform in the next 20 years. The effect of the 2018 pension reform, when it was decided to gradually raise the retirement age to 65 for men and 60 for women, will be exhausted within the next 20 years. This is the opinion of experts from the Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Sciences. According to their estimates, by 2045, the country will need to reform the pension system again due to an aging population and increasing pressure on the budget. Our journalists know all the details. In
Russia, pensions are once again being discussed. This time, without trying to pretend that everything is under control. Economists from the Russian Academy of Sciences are speaking frankly. In 20 years, the country will need a new pension reform. Not because someone wants it, but because otherwise the system simply won't survive.
So you won't have an easy life. And we'll be asking much more strictly.
There will be fewer working-age people and more pensioners. This means only one thing. The current model won't be able to support those who retire in the 2040s. And even now, those who live on a pension today are already feeling it.
If it weren't for my children, I would have literally starved to death. I'm just being honest. They won't let you do anything. Anyone who tries to speak out will be quickly silenced. That's how our government knows how to do things.
Russian pensioners are far from being a picture of a peaceful old age. These are lines at clinics, saving on medicine, bags of pasta bought on sale, utility bills that get more noticeable every year than any promised indexations.
Potatoes are simply an utter disaster. I don't even let myself buy cabbage anymore, and potatoes now are a real problem. Chicken, damn, that's just a whole other story. It's like something out of a movie. Chicken is already expensive, and don't even get me started on turkey. And the fish, it's like 500 and up. I'm outraged about the price of potatoes. Why are potatoes so expensive?
Some people toil away at their dachas just to get through the summer without extra expenses. Some keep working as long as they have the strength, because a single pension is only enough for the bare essentials, and not always even that. In big cities it's still bearable, but in the regions it's practically impossible.
To them, we're just plain riffraff, nothing more. It's enough for them that we're alive. The main thing is that they have enough. And what about the people? People will survive even worse than this. My deepest respect to them. There are a lot of us. How to put it? Low income, including myself. My pension is 14,000. I'm not the only one like this. There are a lot of people like me. Well, the situation is quite difficult. I do want to work. Let's hope for Putin as well, since he promised to raise pensions for retirees.
Now, specialists say that if nothing changes, things will only get worse. Currently, the balance is maintained by budget injections and subsidies that cover the deficit of the pension fund. But as the population ages, this deficit will only continue to grow. Moreover, starting January 1st, 2026, the value-added tax, VAT, in Russia will be increased. The rate will rise from 20% to 22%. This means that everything an ordinary person buys, food, goods, services, will become more expensive.
The funniest thing is that officials even claim that the amendments submitted to the government will benefit the economy, because they will supposedly give the Bank of Russia the opportunity to lower the key interest rate, first and foremost. Expecting that any tax increase could in principle put the economy on a higher growth trajectory is simply foolish.
Raising the retirement age only postponed the problem, it didn't solve it. Russia is gradually approaching a point where the choices will become tougher. Either reduce spending, raise the retirement age again, or change the very principle of how pensions are calculated. Each option will be even less appealing to some than the others. The irony is that the poverty of today's Russian pensioners is not an exception to the system, but its most honest reflection. Those who are young now may receive even more meager payments in the future. Life will not get easier on its own. Forecasts do not promise gradual improvement. They speak of increasing burdens, a shrinking workforce, and a growing proportion of elderly people. And this is a direct path to the social system becoming much more strained.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Meanwhile, Trump publicly pretends to be making decisions. As for whether to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles or not, unofficially, he refused right away. According to the Wall Street Journal, his special envoy Witko offered Kyiv an alternative. Instead of a handful of missiles that would achieve nothing, exemption from American taxes. The publication notes that in October, when Zelensky flew to Washington to secure the supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles for the Ukrainian armed forces, which would have allowed for more effective strikes on Russian oil refineries, potentially forcing Russia to come to the negotiating table, Witkoff advised Ukraine to appeal to Donald Trump for a 10-year exemption from tariffs, which, in his opinion, would significantly accelerate the country's economic development. And this is not surprising. It was Witkoff who, on the eve of Zelensky's visit to the White House, initiated a conversation between Trump and the Russian dictator Putin. On the eve of this, Trump spoke with Putin, and the Kremlin dictator was strongly opposed to the transfer of missiles. As we can see, Trump listened. After this conversation, the American leader decided to suspend the issue of Tomahawk deliveries, and that's not all. The publication writes that the Kremlin secretly offered the White House a draft peace plan through business channels. According to sources, the original version was even broader. It was about saving the Russian economy, and America could have been the first to benefit ahead of Europe. And given Trump's love for big deals, it's not all that surprising. Dmitriev lobbied for a scheme in which American corporations could gain access to approximately $300 billion of frozen assets, those very central Bank of Russia assets in Europe, for U.S.-Russian projects. the reconstruction of Ukraine under US management, the development of Arctic mineral resources, and huge deals involving rare earth metals and energy resources. Such a plan would allow the Kremlin to redraw the economic map of Europe and integrate itself into it through the United States, thereby weakening their allies. What the outcome is remains officially unknown. The decision is still being kept secret. Meanwhile, as the Washington Post reports, as early as next week, the Trump administration plans to put heavy pressure on Zelensky to push him toward resolving the war according to the US-Russia plan. The former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, now Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Valery Zaluzhnyi, expressed support for the idea of a long-term ceasefire with Russia in a column for Liga.net. In his opinion, such a truce would give Ukraine time to carry out necessary reforms and rebuild the country.
We Ukrainians, of course, strive for complete victory, for the collapse of the Russian Empire, but we also cannot reject the option of a long-term cessation of the war for years, because this is, in fact, a very common way wars have ended throughout history. At the same time, peace, even if only while awaiting the next war, offers a chance for political change, for deep reforms, for full recovery, economic growth, and the return of citizens.
However, Zelensky warned that even if the war is frozen for years, it will only be a pause before its possible resumption, since the Kremlin's goal remains unchanged: the complete elimination of Ukraine's independence and sovereignty.
When we talk about victory, we need to be honest and say this. Victory means the collapse of the Russian Empire, while defeat means the complete occupation of Ukraine due to its own disintegration. Everything else is just a continuation of the war. In
this regard, the general emphasized that before concluding a quick peace without sufficient security guarantees, which in his assessment is hardly possible now, the continuation of the war is inevitable. Putin's friend Orbán is once again proposing to divide Ukraine. After his visit to Moscow, Putinist Orbán delivered yet another imperial narrative. Supposedly, Ukraine should lose part of its territory, which the Kremlin will retain after the International Peace Conference. The Prime Minister of Hungary also stated that Ukraine should exist as a buffer state between NATO and Russia. Moscow and NATO are supposedly to agree on the size of the Ukrainian army, and Kiev allegedly just needs guarantees that no one will subjugate it. Oh, and yes, Orbán called this the only possible long-term solution. Meanwhile, Polish President Karol Nawrocki refused to meet personally with Putin's friend at the Visegrad Group summit in Budapest. The reason is Orbán's visit to Moscow and the awkward context that Warsaw decided not to support. A joke in terrorist Russia. Putin instructed the government to create an objective perception of Russia abroad as a democratic state governed by the rule of law. This follows from the approved national policy strategy until 2036. Just how far Putin's Russia is from being a democratic state, that's what we're going to talk about in this segment.
Putin has once again decided to stir things up.
I ask you not to slow down the pace of accomplishing the assigned tasks.
Now, by order of the Kremlin's master, officials must convince foreigners that Russia is, above all, about democracy and the rule of law.
Just this very day, Volodin, the prominent speaker of the State Duma, started to widely proclaim and assert to absolutely everyone that apparently numerous foreigners are actively seeking refuge in Russia away from this supposedly damned European continent. Why do you think for freedom of speech?
Shaping an objective opinion abroad about Russia as a state governed by the rule of law is part of the Kremlin's strategy until 2036.
Let's suppose for a moment that one day the war will finally end or at least pause. That doesn't mean the Kremlin will just stash away its main desires somewhere in a closet, nothing of the sort. As long as Putin is in power, his main ambitions remain in place. They're not going anywhere. What is his main ambition? His main ambition isn't even Ukraine. Putin's biggest ambition today is to redefine the world so that he can bring all the countries of the former Eastern Bloc back under his influence.
But still, who is this mostly aimed at? At the Russians themselves to boost their patriotic spirit, or at an external audience?
Officials don't have to explain all this to the Russian voter. The Russian voter understands perfectly well that none of this is real. But it's the Western people who need all this explained to them, how great things are in Russia, how wonderful everything is here, and how bad everything is in the West. Over there in the West, everything is terrible. There's no freedom of speech. There's nothing at all. They're all being deceived, the poor souls. And they're even being deprived of cheap Russian oil and gas because everyone is just so awful.
So in words, it's a paradise. Equal rights, freedoms, traditional values, but in reality it's repression, restrictions, and criminal liability for your opinions.
That's what doesn't exist. So what freedoms are there in Russia today? None at all. Absolutely none. You can't speak, you can't gather, and there are no real elections either. In other words, there are no civil liberties at all. So what exactly could you possibly tell a Westerner about how truly great life is in Russia? I'm not even talking about purely economic issues, which are significant. But just today we read that the Russian government has actually started up the printing press because the national budget deficit is simply enormous and growing rapidly.
Well, that's the crux of the matter. In addition to fairy tales about the real Russia, the Kremlin also wants to step up the promotion of Russian culture and traditional values abroad. In other words, it's not enough for them to influence other countries. They want even more.
I would say that unfortunately, Putin is quite effective in this propaganda strategy of his. And then, when Trump came to power in the United States, a man who seems to think all this is nonsense and who might even genuinely believe that Putin stands for traditional values, although what traditional values are we talking about if Putin himself doesn't even have a family? Honestly, what traditional values are there, for heaven's sake?
And what's funny is that Putin presents all of this as some kind of fight against Russophobia. The document is also intended to help preserve the unity of the peoples and the territorial integrity of the country.
How does Putin's propaganda differ from Soviet propaganda? The difference is that Putin pours enormous amounts of money into propaganda. On the one hand, and on the other hand, they operate in a technologically competent way. That is, they take and use all modern methods.
A heavy burden has fallen on the shoulders of Russian officials. But why them specifically? Doesn't Russia have other, more reliable and familiar ways of exerting influence?
For officials, it's more of a scare tactic. Because as we know, officials are quite fond of vacationing in Europe. And so, when this is stated to them directly, it's also a warning. Don't even think about going anywhere without approval. It should be noted that nowadays you really can't go anywhere in Russia without approval. Because almost like in Soviet times, foreign passports are being confiscated.
Russia is trying to build a beautiful facade which it has destroyed itself. But the world isn't blind either, and in the Kremlin's case, actions don't match the pretty words at all.
Maria Zakharova decided to put an end to the topic that apparently concerns her the most. In a recent interview, she quite seriously stated that the rumors about her drinking are purely a NATO fake. Do you understand why? There's nothing else to find. Apparently they searched high and low. I genuinely believe, without any hint of exaggeration whatsoever, that a truly considerable amount of dedicated effort and significant resources was meticulously expended in a concerted attempt to discover, somewhere deep within the various backrooms, extensive corridors, or numerous official offices of NATO, some plausible justification or compelling pretext to conceive and ultimately present something even more detrimental, something truly appalling and utterly unacceptable. Let me remind you, this is the same woman who accused NATO of attacking the USSR. For years, she talked about combat mosquitoes and biolabs in Ukraine. And now she's genuinely outraged that someone dared to mention her harmful fondness for a drink. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you next time.